We've got a number of questions to get through. I'm going to move on, if I may. But before I do, I just want to say that Question Time is in Swindon next week, in the southwest of England, and the week after that we are in Rugby in Warwickshire. So if you'd like to come to either show and you'd like to be part of the audience, go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions that are on the screen, and you can come and be part of our audience. And also we have all the dates there up until Easter. So if any of the shows are coming near you, do come along and be part of the conversation. OK, let's take another question now from Kelly. Kelly Ricks. Ah, there you are.
Those opposed to gender reforms wonder why safeguarding has been tightened for women's prisons but not for women's only spaces in society. Should there be an urgent wider review in light of the double rapist Isla Bryson?
Right, so let's just put a little bit of context here. So Scotland has passed a law which Westminster has vetoed, which would make it easier and quicker to change gender, and at the same time, because that law is not in effect here in Scotland. At the same time, a convicted male rapist, the Isla Bryson you're referring to, is claiming to be a woman and wants to be in a woman's prison, and that decision is now under review. What's your view, Kelly, since you asked the question?
I'm quite a liberal person, so my concern would be that somebody's taken advantage of a situation as a means and a way of getting round to vulnerable people. So that's the worry, really. Now, where's the protection for those women?
OK. Jenny?
So, obviously, we've just recently passed the legislation that the lady has spoken to, and the legislation hasn't passed into law because the UK government has taken a very unusual step in enacting
an unprecedented step.
Indeed. In enacting a Section 35, which has never happened in the history of devolution. It's very unusual for the UK government to behave in this manner, and we'll come to that momentarily. I think to the issues at play here, the individual case has obviously been discussed at First Minister's Questions here in Scotland, I think now on 2 occasions. And let's be very clear, that individual is a rapist. That individual has committed a heinous crime against a woman, and that individual deserves to be in jail for a very, very long time. Now, we also, at the same time, in Scotland and across the UK, need to be mindful that trans women are not all a threat to other women. Predatory men are a threat to other women. We know that. So we need to be really mindful and careful about our language, and I think that's hugely important. The Equality Act, of course, allows for there to be a delineation between single-sex spaces, so that is you're able to do that essentially under the provisions within the Equality Act, and I think that's quite important to say that. But it's been, I think, quite at times a toxic debate in Scotland, but it's worth saying that this legislation passed in the Scottish Parliament with an overwhelming majority of parliamentary support. We had Labour MSPs, Conservative MSPs, Liberal MSPs, Green MSPs and SNP MSPs from every party supported it. So for the UK government to take this unprecedented action to block the democratic will of the Scottish Parliament is unprecedented, as Fiona has said, but it also calls into question, really, devolution and the role of the UK government in that. And, you know, I think there are bigger challenges down the road in that respect for Scotland.
Also, it's worth mentioning that there were, 9 SNP MSPs, I think, who didn't support it.
There were.
You say it was across the board. So, India, Kelly's question is, those opposed to gender reforms wonder why safeguarding has been tightened for women's prisons, but not for women's only spaces in society. So should there be a wider review of that, given what's happening with Isla Bryson?
No. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me, because this has been a debate now that has raged for minimum 3-4 years. It's been incredibly toxic, and it's been awful as a trans person.
Do you mean in terms of the gender reform?
I mean the whole debate, and to be sat at home and see people who aren't actually trans discuss your life and paint you as a whole en masse as dangerous to society and unwanted is just horrible. But to the point in question, there are bad apples in all walks of life. There are bad Protestants, there are bad Catholics, there are bad lesbians, there are bad gays, and yes, there are bad trans people. And all of those people, if they do something criminal and are found guilty, they deserve to go to jail and to be punished. A jail that is suitable for them and where everybody else is safe. And what you've been subjected to, I'm afraid, over the last couple of weeks, which is now par for the course, is a lot of misinformation by a media that is completely transphobic. We have an audited trail of 1,000 plus negative stories a month on 0.5% of the population. It's not even 0.5, because if you half that, it's only trans women that people are getting upset about. So that's 1,000 articles a month on 0.2% people. Just to let you know, the thing about these prisoners being put in with women isn't actually true. They were put in solitary confinement during that time. They were held on a wing that was available at that point. I've been to prisons, I know how the system works. Since 2004 in Scotland, the rule has been that anyone who's trans and wants a transfer into the women's estate can apply. That's a human right. They're entitled to apply. And the procedure is then that a panel of mixed professionals from different disciplines will compile reports, they'll get together and discuss it. And there is categorically no way somebody who has committed rape would be moved into the women's estate. Now, I know some of you might not believe that, given what you've read in the press, but a lot of these stories are made up.
Can I just ask you, I hope it is a given here that no one is suggesting that because you are trans,
well, I'm sorry,
that clearly you would be offended, because that's clearly not what we're going to be saying here.
This is a bigger issue for you.
No, but I just wanted to, I'm so sorry, Andy, but I just wanted to, when you say that no one who is a sex offender or a rapist and claim to be a woman could pass a panel, be put in a women's prison. Tiffany Scott, who's a trans woman with a history of extreme violence, has got a lifelong restriction order after being convicted of stalking a 13-year-old. She was approved to go to a female prison in Scotland. And this by the Scottish Prison Service, and this is now, because this whole hoo-ha is under review. I'm not saying it's an issue of a trans issue, but nonetheless, the Scottish Prison Service doesn't seem to be catching these people when they should.
Well, with respect, it is. I think there's 4 trans women in the Scottish prison.
I was just giving her as an example where she was
at the moment. None of whom have committed offences. And with the greatest respect, it is a bigger picture, and you can see that by the context of the question and how it's blended into something else. You know, we're talking about some bad apples here who've done horrible things and nobody is defending them. But it's now, the attempts are being made to try to broaden it out. So it will affect somebody like me. So if I was on a night out and I got raped, where would I be sent? Would I be sent to a male prison? That's where some people would like to send me, which would be ridiculous. Trans women are 20 more times likely to be attacked. And I think there's this idea as well that women's prisons are like the Women's Institute. Everybody's making jam and doing knitting. They're really bad places. This particular jail used to be known as Scotland's toughest prison. And I think at the end of the day, it's the best prison for the best person.
Okay. Ella.
Well, Jenny says that language is very important, and I agree. And I think most people at home will have noticed that you kept saying the individual. But, I mean, you have to start beg the question, is Adam Graham the double rapist? A man
who now calls himself Isla
fine, if that's what he wants to do. A man or a woman? Because the question at hand is not whether this rapist should serve a sentence for rape. It's whether this individual is a man or a woman, and therefore which prison he or she goes into. So what is your answer? Is this individual a man or a woman?
I'm sorry, this individual is a rapist.
No. We know that. I want to know, is this individual a man or a woman?
Please? The First Minister was asked this question today at First Minister's Question Time. She gave the response.
Very confusing answer.
If you'll let me speak. She gave the response that she didn't know enough about the individual in question. I would say likewise. But I think the most important thing in this case, we have to be very careful, because we trust the Scottish Prison Service to make these judgments on behalf of Scottish ministers. That is their role, that is their job. And it's also worth saying, to the point in relation to reviews, there are 2 reviews underway at the moment in Scotland, one in relation to the case that was previously discussed,
haven't answered the
and that will
question.
report tomorrow, and the second is being undertaken by the Scottish Prison Service and will report directly to Scottish ministers. It is absolutely essential. We trust the Prison Service to make these decisions
haven't answered
to
the
keep
question.
our prison population safe. I have answered the question.
No, you haven't. You haven't. But can I just say, Fiona, if I can cut... the reason why I think this is...
Should we give Jenny one more chance to answer the question?
Carry on, yeah.
Because the audience
I'd love to hear your answer.
Well.
I really would.
This individual is a rapist. That is the most important thing.
Now, listen, the reason why this is such an important question is because, you know, as Kelly said, this is a discussion that is not just about the situation of prisons or rape crisis centres, which are very important places that are sex-based for a reason. And there's a kind of... It's remarkable to me that politicians in this country, in Scotland and Wales and in England, seem to have given up on the, belief in reality that sex is real and that it's irrefutable and that It's really important because this isn't just about those kind of very intense places like a prison or like a rape crisis centre where it is vital that you can beg the question, why can't men budge up and let someone into solitary confinement?
What you're
not women?
about to hear
but
now
the point is, hang on, the point is, if politicians and a government cannot deal in reality and in truth and deal with facts that are based on the things that we all understand, then why would you have any belief in anything they say? Why would you have any belief in the justice system? Because for the kind of group that we haven't mentioned so far is women, and it's women who are being made to pay for it.
I will come out. There's lots of times I'll come to you, India. I know you want to come back in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, it's not trans people who are going around attacking women, either in life or in prisons. It's predatory men. The biggest offenders within prisons are actually
well, do you think
the
Adam
guards.
Graham's a man then?
Now, I'll answer your question. This person, I'm not going to call them that because that's not the name that they go by now. We live in a civilised society, and just as
we're talking about a rapist.
Well,
I mean, I don't know how they fit into a civilised society.
I know you're desperate to drag this into the gutter, but I'm not going to go there. If there is a gay sex offender or a gay predator, we don't suddenly become homophobic. If there's a black rapist, we don't suddenly become rapists. Well, what do you mean by they're pretending they're something they're not? They could be a genuine trans person who's born that way, who's had no choice. You're making it sound like a lifestyle, something that they've opted to do. You don't know. You're presuming.
Kelly, if I just really quickly, Kelly made the point that she's very liberal-minded, and I think most of us are like that. You know, the vast majority of people, save a few bad apples, are generally of the mindset of live and let live, love who you want to love, dress how you want to dress, call yourself what you want to call yourself.
Sorry.
And you kind of have to bend over backwards apologising as a woman and do all that whole kind of spiel before you get to say what you want to say. But generally people are liberal-minded. What we won't accept is to be forced to say things that we know aren't true, that sex is irrefutable, and that men can turn into women by stating it after 3 months of living
I tell you what,
as a woman.
because I must go to India, of course I will let you back in. I just want the First Minister herself was saying today that she thinks Isla Bryson is probably faking it. That's her view.
Yes. And
do you share that?
And it's a possibility. I'm saying I don't know. Nobody in this audience actually knows what that is. The people who do know or will make that judgment are the people that are actually talking to her, are involved in this case. But this notion, and this is the gutter that I really want to avoid, this chip away at trans people generally. We started this question talking about one bad apple.
I have not chipped away at transgender people.
And it's then been expanded into the fact that trans people aren't real, they're pretending. Well,
I never said that either.
That's not the case. Trans people have existed in all cultures, around the world, all times.
Come on, India.
It's a real thing. No,
you talked about misinformation, and now you're willfully misrepresenting what I said.
You're the one trying to drag it down. We are a tiny population.
I think anyone
we
that's
are not a threat.
Your Twitter account, India, will know a lot about gutter
puffing
discussion.
us up into this.
Well, I tell you
what we want to do, and I'm not suggesting anything but what either of you are saying, but what we want to do is have a civilised and polite conversation about it, don't we? So let's have that. Yes, the woman here.
Transgender people and gay people are not paedophiles. There are certain percent who might be. But with this conversation, we don't put them in a male prison, we don't put them in a female prison. Is it time that we actually say, you have your own prison to go to.
No, because we're still men and women. It's
I
as
agree
simple
with
as
you,
that.
but
We're
I'm
not
asking the
separate
question, is it
species.
not time that maybe somebody has that conversation?
Okay,
No.
let me. Will you forgive me? I'll just get around the
Yeah.
audience just a little bit. The woman there in the pink and yellow top.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist that supports a lot of children coming through this, whether it's transgender or transsexual, and it is coming into schools now. The lady asked about single-sex spaces. That is a big issue that teachers are also dealing with now, because these young people can't get access to a GP, they can't get the ball rolling in terms of really working out what they need. You know, I work through a charity, so I'm able to offer services for free, but it really is, in terms of gender reform, how is the SNP, how's the government going to support people really make sense of the reality of their identity, the supports that they need? And then in schools, where do we see a single-sex space where, you know, if we have transgender, transsexual, do we then have, you know, female, male, and then non-binary? Teachers are dealing with this on a daily basis, and they are also like the new social workers, because they're trying to support families manage this. And it's about support. Of course, it's about support. We need resources to really support these young people that need these services.
Okay, a woman here in the front.
We don't allow men into female spaces. There are good men.
Start that again. I missed the beginning.
We don't allow men into female spaces. For good reason. There are good men and there are predatory men. We should not allow trans into female spaces.
So you're classing trans
there are
women
good
as
trans and there are predatory trans, and that's a fact. Women have to be safe. Women and children have to be safe.
So, for example, a transgender woman who has lived as a woman for many years, who may have had surgery, for example, to all intents, as far as anyone considers herself a woman and looks like a woman, she shouldn't be allowed in a women's only space. Is that what
How
you're
do
saying?
you know? There's nothing on their head to say whether they're predatory or not.
But
the same
would
as
you-
a man. How do you know by looking at a man if he's predatory or not?
But would you say
don't
that
know.
about a lesbian, for instance? That a predatory lesbian, and you would want to check their history? Because what you've just said there, effectively, is that trans women are men and should be treated
Well,
as
in my
men.
opinion, they still are men.
So I would go in a male jail,
Well,
looking as I do, and just take my chances. And what, that would be my fault for looking like this?
Well, in my opinion, you can't change sex. That's my opinion. You can't change sex. You can live your life how you like, and I wish you no harm. But you can't biologically
it's not
change
a choice.
sex.
You know, I'm biological. I'm a woman. I didn't choose to be trans. This is how I was born. All I've done is align my body with how I feel, so I have a reasonable life. And most trans people, as I say, there's hardly any of us around anyway. We lead normal lives. You're actually talking about 4 trans prisoners in the female
excuse me, if there's hardly any of
estate.
you around, why do I have to change?
Why do what, sorry?
Why does society have to change? If there's
Because we're a
hardly any
civilised
around?
society, and you do change. I could have heard this conversation in the 1970s about black people, or in the 1980s about gay people, saying, why do I have to change? Why do I have to temper my language? This type of thing.
What
It's
an
the same
outrageous
thing
allegation
as
against
being
this woman.
harassed.
What a cheap and,
Okay.
and
It is
outrageous
actually-
allegation.
It is quite offensive considering what you have written in your Twitter about a young black woman.
What's
And
that? Oh, can I clarify this?
You better have... I mean, what I am
Yeah.
really hoping for, because this can be such a toxic debate, and I desperately do not want it to be on this programme.
Yeah.
I really don't. And I also don't want to put India in the position where she is the one person, you know, talking for all trans people.
It's a really
that is
quick-
not the debate I want to
answer
have.
to that
But
one.
yes,
Yeah. So one thing the gender critical movement do to try and knock the credibility of trans women, trans being an adjective before woman, is to scrunch the 2 words up. So you end up with this word that doesn't even exist called trans woman, all racked up together. One particular commentator who is known for taunting trans people online did this to me, deliberately called me that, and I effectively sent a tweet, which you can all go online and look at, saying, how would you like it if I scrunched up the word black with woman to make black woman? And then I said that, you know, she was ignorant on the subject. You can go on Twitter, you can look at it. That's the answer to the question, not racist.
OK, I'm going to come to the 2 men on the panel, because you've been sitting there very quietly and haven't said anything.
Good luck.
And also, I just want to point out, John, I want to come to you because this is the first time, as far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have in the same room in a studio here a representative of the UK government and the Scottish government, where after the UK government has vetoed, using this thing called Section 35, a law that has been passed by the Scottish government, by which I mean this Gender Reform Act, which would streamline, make it easier for people to change their gender. Would you like to say why the UK government has chosen to do that?
I will, but can I just address the key part of the question? And it's absolutely wrong that that man who committed 2 very serious sexual offences against women was allowed to be jailed in a female-only prison.
He was segregated.
And very serious questions have to be asked, both of the Scottish Prison Service and of the Scottish Government, as to how and why that was allowed to happen. Now, I think we all know what a woman is. We have mothers, we have sisters, we have biological women are biological women, trans women are trans women, and of course we have a legal process. We have a legal process to allow people to change their gender. That's something that I personally support and the UK government supports, and we need to support people and recognise the very challenging circumstances that people going through that process have to face. But we need to ensure that people going through that process have the necessary safeguards, society has necessary safeguards in place to ensure that we don't have the scenario we had in that female prison where you had somebody purporting to be
well, again,
a female was allowed to change their sex to allow themselves in a female-only prison.
Population.
Which gets me back, Fiona, to your question about the concerns we had about the bill going through the Scottish Parliament. We did not think there was the suitable and necessary safeguards in place to give protection to women and others in society to stop that type of scenario arising. Section 35, the Secretary of State for Scotland used Section 35 because we did have very serious concerns about the implications of this bill in a number of areas, whether it was women-only spaces under part of the Impact on the Equalities Act. But this is the first time since 1999, over 340 bills have been passed by the Scottish Parliament, and this is the first time that this has happened. Given the seriousness of this nature, given the strong advice the UK government and the Secretary of State was receiving, I absolutely believe it was the right decision. The Scottish Government rushed this through despite serious concerns that were being raised across society, not just by politicians but by others. And this is why we believe the Scottish Government need to go away and come forward with another bill.
I'll come back to I'll just get the rest of the panel in. Ian, do you support that decision?
Well, I walked past Donald Dure's statue in Glasgow earlier on, coming here, and Donald Dure created Section 35 to facilitate the Scottish Parliament to be able to pass laws in devolved areas that had cross-border implications. The key thing about Section 35 is you're supposed to resolve all these problems before you get there. It's supposed to be a last resort. Both governments have failed to resolve those issues, so we're now in this debate about who gets trades off in terms of rights and the concerns that are coming across in terms of cross-border issues. So
which position do you take? Do you take the Scottish Labour position, which is to support the Act introduced in Scotland, or do you take the English Labour and the UK-wide, I suppose, but the English Labour position, the position of Keir Starmer, which is not to support it? No, we support the modernisation of the GRA. It's our GRA Act from 2004. And the Scottish Labour Party were right to back it in Scotland. They got the Equality Act, which is something we've been discussing on the face of the bill. What is inconceivable, though, is that we had an amendment down, I think it was a Conservative amendment, which we backed, to stop convicted sex offenders from being put into prisons, and people who have been accused of sexual offences put into prisons, and the Scottish Government voted that down. I'm not sure why, because all of this debate, the one thing that the Bryson case has shown is that the concerns that people were raising, whether they're legitimate or not, and that will now be tested in the courts, have now been heightened because the Bryson case has said, actually, this is what we were screaming about. And this is the concerns that we had. And the bottom line we've got here is rapists should not be in women's prisons, full stop, regardless of who they are. Let me get a bit more around the audience. Right, so many of you with your hands up, I'm wondering where to start. Is the man there in the burgundy jacket with the black polo neck?
Isla Bryson can call herself a trans woman, and that's good. I think that's right and proper. I think what needs to happen is the public need to have faith in Scottish Prison Service and the clinical colleagues that make a risk assessment of all prisoners, and how they're housed. Now, I think the media have got it wrong, as you said, India, and there was never any women in Cotton Vale at risk because the person was segregated. Moving forward, I think we just have to put faith in what our clinical colleagues in the prison service are doing. So.
Okay. The young woman in the grey top.
Hi, yes, I completely agree with what you just said. I am in agreement with the bill, and quite frankly, I think this whole conversation is distracting from more important things like the economic crisis at the moment, the transport crisis, the education crisis, and I don't really think, you know, a predator is a predator at the end of the day, and I think trans people are at the end of the day, you know, they are abused so much. And I think it's just, frankly, it's shocking that this is a conversation that keeps on going on, and there's other things to talk about.
And the man next to you, you were nodding in agreement.
Although LGBT people have been attacked since forever using the examples of bad apples. You can go all the way back to Section 28. You can go all the way back to 1967 and the legalisation of same-sex relations. And I think the exact same is happening now, and I think it's frankly really bad and bigoted.
Okay. Jenny, before I move on, I just want to come in. Would you like to respond to John in terms of the use of this unprecedented use of this order, Section 35?
I think a few points. I think India made the point that this is not to do with the GRR. We need to be very careful.
So for those who are not aware, the Gender Recognition Reform, which then led to the Gender Reform Act, which, for those south of border markets are not so familiar with, which is this streamlining of being able to change your gender.
Indeed. So there's been a policy in place in the Scottish Prison Service since, I think, 2014 in relation to trans prisoners. So this is not a new policy, and obviously we spoke about the review earlier on. I think it is important to recognise this is one of the most consulted on pieces of legislation in the Scottish Parliament's history. 6 years of consultation. This was not a rush-through piece of legislation. The Conservatives used to back it. And what has happened in the interim years is that it's undoubtedly now being used to weaponise a culture war. And I think we've heard some of that play out, unfortunately, this evening. But I do want to talk to some of the politics in relation to Section 35, because I know that the Social Justice Secretary, Fiona Robinson, had a call with the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack, only last week to get a better understanding of some of the UK government's concerns. It is worth saying that the UK government at no point raised any of these concerns throughout the passage of the bill, despite having ample opportunity to do so. And I think Kemi Badenoch even met with Fiona Robinson just in December. At no point were any concerns raised. We would have listened to them, of course, and we would have acted in good faith. But essentially the message from Alistair Jack, the Secretary of State for Scotland, was change the bill, drop it, or we'll see you in court. Now, I don't think that's an acceptable way for the Secretary of State to behave. But obviously, we want to try to work with the UK government to get a resolution here. So we've asked for more detail on what that looks like. And we have had no answer. So, John, perhaps you can tell us today what the key challenges are. And will Alistair Jack meet with Fiona Robinson again on this very matter so we can get a resolution?
The Secretary of State was very clear, both in the House of Commons when he made his statement explaining why he was using this power, and in the 13-page statement.
How would he like it to change in order for the UK government to feel it could approve it?
It's the Scottish Government. We've set out the concerns that we have. I mean, the example that was used earlier about prisons. I mean, the other real concern we have is, for example, women's refuges. I mean, what would happen if somebody decided to change their gender to allow them to have access to a
I mean, it's worth pointing out
that's the type of example. That's an example. That's an example as to why the safeguards.
Hang on. You're both talking at the same time. I was just going to point out that a number of organisations supporting refugees in Scotland have supported the Gender Reform Act.
But there's not a consistent view. There's big concerns being raised in Scotland about the impact that this Act is going to have.
And in terms of particular changes, there's nothing you're going to suggest here.
It's the Scottish Government's bill. The Scottish Government's bill.
Very quickly, because you made an excellent point over there. There's a lot of other important things going on that we should be talking about, and I want to get to them. So very quickly,
to that point, the reason why this is so important and the reason why it has to be discussed is because I am the only person on this panel who is of the mind, like the vast majority of the rest of the country, that sex is not something that you can change. The SNP, the Conservatives are, you know, in large part, the orchestrators of this issue by introducing under Theresa May changes to the idea of self-ID and raising the question itself. Okay. And the reason why it's so important that your political class does not reflect the common sense of the nation is because this isn't just about this. You're right. This isn't just about predatory men or predatory trans people or prisons or rape crisis centres. This is about understanding what's true and false in society. It's about how we raise our children, how we socialise our kids, how we get them, how we get them to understand the world, how we get them to understand each other. It's actually about, you know, for me, the thing that I find most remarkable is that we would engage in such legal disingenuousness as to suggest that you could change the idea that a man rapes a woman and later say, no, it was a woman who raped a woman, or that a woman was born on January the 21st and then 20 years later say, no, actually, that was a man. And the reason why it's important to stand by the idea of fact being able to, something that you can hold in your hands in society, is because if we let go of that, not only is it bad for women, and not only is it bad for collecting data, but it's also bad for trust in politics, because a lot of these lot are feeding you a whole load of nonsense.
Okay. I've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to let you go on very quickly, India.
Yeah, really, really quick. I mean, this is essentially what you would hear in 1970s about gay couples, and that it was totally unnatural for a man to be with another man or a woman to be with another woman. It's the same conversation rehashed and dressed up in a completely different way.
Strong feelings.